This is episode 77 of That Shakespeare Life. This episode is brought to you in part by Audio Shakespeare Pronunciation App, the only audio Shakespeare pronunciation app, which is designed to remove fears about how to speak Shakespeare's language so that his plays are accessible to everyone. Find out more about this app in today's show notes and stay tuned after the episode for how you can learn more.
Hello, I'm Ben Crystal, actor, author, and explorer of original practices in Shakespeare. And another great method for studying the history of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
You can't but think about the Pied Piper and poetry being what kills rats here in Ireland. The Pied Piper on the continent, that image of the music is driving the rats out.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
When Queen Elizabeth wanted to punish Robert Devereux for his imprudent behavior at court, she placed him in charge of handling the Irish rebels and sent him off to Ireland with strict instructions on how to handle that situation. His campaign was ultimately unsuccessful for England due to reasons that can and have filled volumes on the history of the 9 Years' War, as well as the Irish Rebellion. But where this elaborate Irish history finds an intriguing connection to Shakespeare is hidden in a seemingly nonsensical line about the death of Irish rats in Shakespeare's play, As You Like It. In a single line, Shakespeare invokes a popular legend about the ability of Irish poetry to kill rats by rhyming them to death. While the bard could simply be referencing the power of words here, we've invited an expert on Irish legends, poetry, and Shakespeare, Dr. Kelly Fitzgerald, to sit down with us and take us back to 1599 when As You Like It was written, as well as the same year Essex was sent to Ireland, and explain what this line implies with its suggestion of outright political commentary by Shakespeare during a time when it was quite dangerous for a playwright to write something so pointed. Kelly Fitzgerald is an assistant professor in the School of Irish Celtic Studies and Folklore at the University College Dublin. She graduated in folklore and early medieval Irish at University College Dublin and defended her doctoral dissertation there in 2009. Her dissertation was titled Literary and Oral Interaction in Irish Folklore. She is also chairperson of ANU Productions and a director of the National Folklore Foundation. Recently, she was involved around the collecting of oral histories in the development phase of Dublin's Tenement Museum. Hello, Kelly. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
In Shakespeare's play, As You Like It, there's a line where Rosalind says, quote, "I was never so berhymed since Pythagoras' time that I was an Irish rat." That comes from Act 3, Scene 2. There's a great deal of history to unpack here, but Kelly, I want to start with being berhymed. What does it mean for Rosalind to be berhymed?
Yes, so what does she mean? She is obviously kind of speaking about that no one has written about her so much or put her into verse. She's actually been put into rhyme. So this sense that she has been written about.
Now, there's a real legend associated with Irish rats that was held by Elizabethans when Shakespeare wrote this play and wrote these lines. Kelly, what is the legend of the Irish rat and their ability to kill with magical rhyming words?
I guess I want to kind of go back a bit. Well, on the one instance, it wasn't just Shakespeare that was referring to this legend.
Okay.
In his time, there were a number of writers who were engaging with this legend. Ben Jonson, for example, would have included "rhyme them to death as they do Irish rats" in drumming tunes. We have it. Randolph has it in his Jealous Lovers. "And my poets shall, with a satire steeped in vinegar, rhyme 'em to death as they do rats in Ireland." So we see again and again, even Dean Swift, when he's giving advice to a young poet, he's quoting Sir Philip Sidney. And Sir Philip Sidney has it in the defense of poesy, to be driven by a poet's verses, to hang yourself, nor to be rhymed to death, as is said to be done in Ireland. Right. So again, it's a theme that writers of that time were kind of really engaging with. And in some ways, so much of this we have as well, because it stayed in the folk tradition. I suppose you can't but think about the Pied Piper and poetry being what kills rats here in Ireland. The Pied Piper on the continent, that image of the music is driving the rats out. I think it's quite interesting if you just think of it in a larger kind of European sense, that the arts are able to kind of dispel, this what is not wanted or what have you.
According to what I've read of Irish folklore, there's a poet, I think it's Senken, who might be the source of this lore about deadly Irish poetry. Don't judge my pronunciation of Irish too harshly. But Kelly, could you tell us about this poet, his story, and whether Shakespeare would have been referencing his poetry with this reference he included in As You Like It?
Shanken was an early Irish poet, and we see that he kind of composed this bit of verse as he returned home one evening, and he saw that his food had been eaten, and he first kind of was to blame a servant girl in the house, and she kind of asserted her innocence and stated at the time that as no person could have entered the room that where the food was, where she left it, that it must have been emptied by the rats or by the mice, as it is actually in this. Loch is the term that they use. So it's quite interesting. By the time it goes into English, it's more of that Frognock term as opposed to loch. So she actually says it's mice who have taken it. And mice, he then believes, the poet, Shanken, believes the girl's account, and he vows that he would make the mice pay for their depredation. And then he composes a metrical satire on them. Of this, we have but 2.5 quatrains. And this is kind of a literal translation from the Irish, so it won't probably sound as poetic, perhaps, as their material in English. But we see mice, though sharp their snouts, are not powerful in battles. I will bring death on the party for having eaten Bridget's present, the food. Small was the present she made us. Its loss to her was not great. Let her have payment from us in a poem. Let her not refuse the poet's gratitude. You mice, which are in the roof of the house, arise, all of you, and fall down. And thereupon 10 mice fell dead on the floor from the roof of the house in Shanken's presence. And Shanken said to them, it was not you that should have been satirized, but the race of cats, and I will satirize them. And Shanken then pronounced a satire, but not a deadly one, on the chief of the cats of Ireland, who kept his princely residence in the cave of Noth, near Slane, in the county of Meath. So that is the early reference to the kind of satire imposed on rats due to their behavior of stealing food that was not theirs to steal.
It's amazing how they use satire and poetry and just the power of words. I mean, we have the English expression of the pen is mightier than the sword, but in Ireland, It's very strong image of satire being not just a weapon, but a effective weapon against things like rats and punishing the cats for not keeping them away. And I just love this whole thing. I want to ask you, do you have part of that, the satire that he spoke against the cats? Do you have that in Irish? Can we hear it in Irish?
I don't have that because that's in the manuscript. So that's on Irish script on screen, but I don't have it here to me. I wasn't thinking that I would be using it.
Yeah, well, I didn't think to ask it until you were using Irish expressions, and I went, I should ask her to say that.
What I think is really important is that everyone realizes that they were writing in Irish and that we are really looking at such a strong, when people think of Irish culture, when they think of like early medieval Irish society, understanding the makeup of that and the kind of social fabric. On the one hand, you have praise. Like on the flip side of that same coin, you have satire. So, and both of those were really important in terms of kind of keeping society balanced, and that behavior would be commented on is really what that's saying. And we have reference up into the 20th century when Tomás Ó Crioghan down in the Blasket Islands. We have reference in his own writing when he's on the island and he's trying to avoid a certain resident on the island with him who will still satire. So that sense of being satired lasted in the Irish-speaking community until the 20th century.
Today, Pythagoras is known for equations like a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and algebra, and the bane of every seventh grader everywhere. But he was also the creator of a kind of religion during his lifetime, which included a great depth into the four humors, astrology, and the relationship between the physical world and humans' relationship to that world. Now, Kelly, is the rhyming associated with killing rats also somehow connected to Pythagoras' work in transmutation and the relationship between humans and the world around them?
That isn't an Irish connection. That is a Shakespearean connection. But I think if you think of it, when you think of Pythagoras, and that's being associated with the theory of the transmigration of souls, so it's being used as her soul is being transmigrated into being a rat, or if she was a rat in Ireland, here she is being transmigrated into Elizabethan England as a woman. I think it's kind of, again, where we see the parallel is the shape-shifting in Irish tradition, in particular women who would be known to shape-shift, whether they were a hare more often than a rat. We see that sense that milk is being stolen from the cattle in the fields, and it's a hare. This kind of mysterious hare is sucking the teats from these cattle, and they're caught. A farmer will shoot into this hare, but it keeps on running. The farmer will run after the hare, and he'll go down into a home or a hovel, wherever he goes. And as he enters it, the only person there is an old woman, but he sees that she has a gunshot wound in her thigh. So again, that sense, in a way, that Shakespeare is drawing on Pythagoras and his kind of philosophical sense and fitting it into a parallel world of looking at Irish material is perhaps a way of seeing that.
In an action that is noted by some historians as having precipitated the Essex Rebellion of 1601, Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, was sent to Ireland by Queen Elizabeth in a famously unsuccessful, at least for England. We'll acknowledge there's a whole Ireland side of this that statement doesn't look at. But that campaign happened in 1599, which is the same year that As You Like It was written. So As You Like It was written in 1599, and then this rebellion occurred in 1601. Is this line about Irish rats a kind of political commentary by Shakespeare?
It's really interesting to think, is this a political commentary by Shakespeare? When you look at it being used as a kind of a trope or an image by a number of writers at the time, are they meeting? Are they discussing this? What are they thinking about this? Because really, that was unsuccessful. The year 1599, when it was written, it's very hard for me, from the Irish perspective, to not go up to 1607 when it's the flight of the earls. So in a way, it's kind of hard for me to unpack it and end at 1599, because really then by 1607, we see that as the end of Gallic culture as we knew it, with the flight of the earls onto the continent and their journey to Rome. And that is definitely remembered in Ireland more strongly. So if they see that as Irish rats, I kind of project here. I'd want Shakespeare to kind of think, like, look at how the Irish are being treated.
Yes, definitely more positively, which, as you pointed out earlier, it could be just an example of how pervasive in the culture this lens was turned towards Ireland because of everything that was going on there, as opposed to, and it doesn't have to have been an insult. It could just be a relationship.
I do think there must have been a relationship, and Ireland was coming into the consciousness perhaps in a way that it hadn't done so strongly before this point, due to the increase in terms of the plantation, the kind of wanting to actually do something with this island. But I also think, being referred to as the bard himself, he would have perhaps been exposed to aspects of Irish culture and all of them, Sydney, Ben Jonson, all that have been referred to here already, perhaps the status of the poet in Irish society would have been something they themselves would have welcomed in English society. I mean, because the patronage system was very strong. I mean, that's like a poet in Ireland would have been connected to a family, a clan, a king who would have paid for his livelihood. It's quite interesting. Then I know this goes beyond your time that we're talking about today, but as we see the decline after that kind of Gaelic world patronage of poets in Ireland really having to find new livelihoods to support themselves, they go through a really difficult time after that.
You mentioned the Irish perspective on this association. And to me, just personally, the idea that Irish poetry is capable of being deadly is totally an act of strength and something to be proud of and very cool. But what is the Irish perspective on this association? Is that considered something to be proud of, or is it insulting for people to draw that association?
I believe it's quite interesting because of course, as time goes on, time from a kind of more communal perspective becomes very flat. So I think people want to associate the poet of early Irish society or the poet with Seamus Heaney, for example. And there's more kind of 19th, 20th, 21st century sense of a poet. So there is a real pride. I mean, there is a pride of Irish as writers in that more general sense. It kind of breaks my heart because I don't really know to what extent people are aware of early Irish culture and the role of praise and satire and the poet at that time. In my kind of academic little bubble, I wish they would, but I don't know.
We've alluded to the idea that we put our biases into our perspective on things, and I may be putting my bias on this because I like to think of Shakespeare as an ultimately cool guy. But when I look at this association of your words and you're using specific words that are able to inflict harm or to be used as a weapon or writing words that could kill. This is a theme that gets carried on past Shakespeare. I mean, there's poets like Yeats and James Joyce who would invoke a cursing and name calling in their works as a way to preserve the rat rhyming tradition. And I think for William Shakespeare and Ben Jonson, who are utilizing this, it definitely comes across like they took a industry pride in being able to say, I am one of these bards that writes words that can kill.
Yes, I would agree with you. Absolutely.
we will celebrate that part of it. There's a line in Henry V where Pistol says, "Qualité calme custer me," and that comes from Act 4. And it's of course not French and it's not English either, but it's not simply nonsense, which many modern productions either omit this line completely or they'll gloss over it as if Pistol's just being rude or nonsensical. But in an article from the Irish Times by Fintan O'Toole in 2012, the great Irish Shakespearean scholar Edmund Malone is referenced as calling foul over this line when Malone contends that the line is actually not nonsense at all, but instead a strong political statement about England's relationship to Ireland at the turn of the 17th century. O'Toole shares that Malone identifies Pistol's response to a French soldier as a phonetic rendering of the title of a Gaelic song, and that particular Gaelic song had become popular in Tudor England. He goes on to suggest that there is even one first folio version of Shakespeare's Henry V that lists Ireland instead of England by mistake. Kelly, can you explain the situation for us? From the rats to the Gaelic songs, these lines seem much more politically charged than the nonsensical reputation they've been given in the 21st century. Would these references have been somewhat scandalous for Shakespeare's original audience?
When I think about this, I suppose, again, it really highlights most people attending a Shakespearean play at this time, this would go over their heads. But it is at that kind of layered sense of him allowing this to come in and what's going on with that. So I absolutely see that. And also that sense of musicality, the sense of Irish identity, very strong, even in the 17th century, still being the harp, the sense of music, all of that is coming across. And I see that Shakespeare, as a writer, as an artist, he finds this kind of kindred spiritship, perhaps, with the Irish as he would see it, as they are being represented, that this is the Irish identity. So again, echoing Malone and echoing Fintan O'Toole, I would agree that Shakespeare is seeing, and also you have to realize England wants Ireland to look artistic, to look feminine, to look poetic. That identity is already happening. So that suits Shakespeare. Again, that kind of comes into why England feels it needed to control in that colonial sense that these people can't take care of themselves. Right. So all of these perspectives and all these identities are coming through, even in the way Ireland is being represented. I feel like we should be bringing Spenser into this, and Spenser, his idea of Ireland and the Fairy Queen and all of that. There's a lot going on at this time. But what is going on?
Yes, there's a ton, and you're right, Spenser and Johnson, and there's just many avenues that are worth coming into this conversation.
Yeah, I think on the one hand, England wants Ireland. They're wild. They can't be quelled. And again, even if you think of mentioning 1599 and the beginning of what ends with the flight of the Earls, England has no one person to deal with in Ireland. Like even at that time, you don't see it as one central space. So England needs to create a sense of what's going on over here. I think that also feeds into Shakespeare's sense of Ireland and how he wants to engage with it, perhaps, of what's happening.
As you suggest, we should bring Spenser and Johnson and all of these other writers into the conversation, which I'm hoping you will have some recommendations for us on what are some of these resources that we need to look at when we want to explore this further, which we absolutely do, because there's a ton of Irish folklore to look into.
How much time Spenser spent in Ireland, we never really know. And again, what's difficult for us, and perhaps you could shed light on this, like I come from a folklore background, but I always find it trying to get my head around it, like how many people are reading Spenser at this time, or how many people are reading Ben Jonson at this time? What's the impact of them? That's kind of a separate narrative, because in a way we're looking at, well, what's influencing them? And the political situation is really an avenue to try and understand what they're drawing and what they're bringing on with them. So
I always try to draw a parallel between the pop culture things that go on today, because Shakespeare really represents kind of the pop culture entertainment there. And so does Spenser in a way. It would be kind of like asking, how many people have heard Beyonce's latest single today and how much of an impact did that, have on them? It's that kind of question of you have to generalize in a way.
Yeah. I know I spend far too much time thinking of these things, but because I would agree with that. Like Shakespeare definitely would have had that impact at the time. That definitely, I suppose it is that space between looking at Ireland and seeing, because again, I think I come from such an Irish perspective. This has been really good for me to kind of break it out a bit. And see who has that. Because again, I was trying to think about this and I wouldn't know it well enough. Like what is going on in Wales as well in terms of the poet. But Ireland always has that very kind of different sense about it. Hence, hundreds of years about what's going on. So just trying to go through that.
There's a ton we could explore about this topic. What are some of your favorite books and resources that you might recommend we use to learn more?
Well, the text on early Irish satire was edited and brought together by Roisin McLaughlin, a colleague of mine here in UCD, and it's called Early Irish Satire. Cassie, I can send these on to you.
Perfect.
It really imbues the kind of brilliant creativity that comes across in this verse. I'd also look at Osborne Bergen, his book, Bardic Poetry, just to kind of understand the world of poetry as it was at the time of Shakespeare, at the height of Gaelic society. So those two texts kind of really draw you into the meat about what we're talking about here.
We ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so this choice would be in addition to those.
My desert island publication is always James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake.
Oh, good choice.
Because every time I read it, it's a new book.
That's true. You can return to it again and again. Well, you'll be very well set up on your deserted island there for sure. Thank you for sharing these resources with us. We'll be sure to place links to the Desert Island book as well as the resources on early Irish satire in the show notes for today's episode. So make sure you check that out. Well, Kelly, what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
At the moment, this may not sound exciting, but this is it. I'm looking at the role of the priest in Irish folklore as, again, this kind of ubiquitous character that almost comes across as being two-dimensional or quite a caricature almost. Really, you can see Irish society demonstrating all aspects of society through the agency of this character. So again, looking at the role of verse, Owen Rua is the poet who would have written quite a bit of anti-clerical verse in the 18th century, and seeing how that kind of allowed society to have kind of a escape route of what is perceived to be as this very homogenized Roman Catholic society. So that's what I'm working on.
Well, that sounds really interesting. We'll look forward to seeing how that project turns out. Kelly Fitzgerald, thank you so much for being here with us today and helping us explore Irish folklore and where it appears in Shakespeare's plays. This has been a fun conversation. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Cassidy.
To join in on this conversation with your thoughts about Irish folklore in Shakespeare's plays, be sure to check out today's show notes. Not only will you find a place to leave your thoughts, but there is extra history there and links to the resources Kelly recommends when you want to explore deeper into the history of Ireland and England in Shakespeare's lifetime. Find all the history over at castycash.com/episode 77. That's castycash.com/EP77. When I first started studying Shakespeare, especially as an American, where the English language is very different on this side of the pond than where Shakespeare was writing, I often mispronounced some of the words that you find in the plays. Like originally I said Gloucester instead of Gloucester. Well, that's why I downloaded Audio Shakespeare Pronunciation app. It's an easy-to-use, straightforward app that you can download to your phone or tablet on iTunes as well as Google Play. And it lets you search any word from Shakespeare, and then it tells you exactly how to say it with a playable audio guide built right in. Audio Shakespeare Pronunciation app is like having a professional voice coach that you can carry in your pocket. Explore all the features of this app and download it right now at castycash.com/Shakespeare app. That's castycash.com/Shakespeare app. That's it for this week. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.